Hello everyone, this is Robin here at SimpleView, and today we're doing training on importing your leisure travel data into your consumer group. As some of you might know, I am the new product education specialist on the CRM side of the house, working for Sam. Sam, introduce yourself.
Hi guys, Sam Brace, Director of Product Education. We are really excited that you're here today to learn all about this topic.
And he's going to be asking you guys questions throughout. He's also going to be controlling any questions that you send to us through the chat, so feel free to pop in anything, and if at any point you guys have any technical issues, let us know. I don't want to lose you, so if it's my fault, I want to make sure we fix it. All right, so moving forward on our first shot here, what we're going to go over today, I just want to review our topics, and that's of course dependent on my computer giving me what I need. All right, so what are we doing today? Our topics. We're going to be evaluating your data sources before importing them. We're going to be looking at your data and getting it ready for the import process. We're going to be using the import template, so we're going to go over how to build that template and what they're used for later on. And then we're also going to talk about the best practices for getting your data mapped during that import process and doing the duplicate checks. So first and foremost, we wanted to know a couple of things from you guys, kind of get a feed on how most of you use this data, or whether or not you have started using this data. So Sam's got a question here for you. We're going to send you a poll.
Yeah, so on your screen right now, you should see 4 choices that are tied to a question. Are you currently importing leisure data into your consumer user group? So some of the options on the screen are yes, we frequently do this. Yes, but it's not a common practice. No, this is not something we currently do. Or I'm not sure if we do this or not. Good question, Sam and Robin. So we're going to leave this up on the screen. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit later about common uses of why someone would be importing leisure data when we get into this. But we want to just quickly gauge who is on the call today and see what you are currently doing and what you know about this. So at this point, it looks like a good portion of our population has voted. But of course, keep those votes coming in. We'll be closing the poll in 3 seconds. So get your votes in as soon as you can. 3, 2, 1. And we are now closed. Excellent. So, Robin, just so you know who is on the call with us today, 40% do frequently import leisure data.
Nice.
And then the rest are a mix between yes, not common, no, we don't do it, or they're not sure.
Gotcha. Nice. So one of the things that we're focusing on today is the consumer import. When we do the consumer imports, our goal here is to look at the data sources that we're going to be importing and determining what you're going to do with them later on. Just to let you know that throughout your entire CRM, you actually do have the ability to import in other modules. But that's for another day. Maybe we'll go over that later on. Or if you have any questions regarding that, reach out to your CRM analyst. But today we're focusing in on your consumer imports and the kind of data that you guys will be pulling in. So the very first thing that we wanted to look at is the data. Where are you getting it from? What are you going to be using it for later on? Good example of a lot of the imports that our clients are doing is reader responses. So let's say, for instance, you've got Texas Monthly and you receive a spreadsheet each month saying that you've got a list of 1,000 people who are interested in your area. They want a visitor guide from you. Or maybe you're getting registered lists from a third party from trade shows and conferences, and you want to import them into your consumer module and use them later on for marketing purposes. Another option is maybe you want to have a list of contacts that are interested in your destination, or such as a state or country or other DMO. So looking at the data as we're pulling it and determining what we want to do with it later on is going to drive and determine how you're pulling in that data and what you're going to do during your mapping import process. So one of the things that we're interested in knowing about is whether or not you're pulling in that data from a reliable resource. Are you pulling in the information from someone whom you purchased a list from? Are they going to be using a list that you guys want to use later on to send out communications? That list itself, you have to have implied or explicit consent in order to email people later on. So just know that the information that you're getting, make sure you're using it in a reliable and legal manner later on.
And that's what we're really focusing on here is which kind of just some common sources that we've seen, like the reader response cards. Those are coming from a reputable source.
Yeah.
We know what Good Housekeeping magazine is. It's something that I can buy at the grocery store. My mom gets it.
Exactly.
It's a wonderful magazine.
Yeah.
But if you purchase it from a company, it's one of those cases where we can't guarantee how that person got on the list.
Right.
Did they give consent to be sold, as it says on here? Did they agree to get your communications, or did you buy it, but they never had been part of that process?
Right.
So you really have to question, how did they end up on the list you're going to get that you're ultimately going to import? Because as we like to say in CRM and CMS, bad data in, bad data out.
Out, yep.
This is very similar in the situation. If you're putting junk data, spam data in your system, you're putting that as a possible output from the CRM, which is not good, so be careful.
Yeah. So in other words, if you got a list of people, they're all from Canada, and you're emailing them and they didn't give you explicit permission, then hey, you could end up with some issues on your hands. So that actually brings us to a poll here that Sam wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so we want to find out, based on the list that we've talked about, reader response cards, third-party events, state tourism departments or country tourism departments or purchase lists, which of these are ones that you actually are putting into your systems if you're doing some type of imports? Now, this is a multi-select, so this is a case where if it's reader response cards and your state department, that's absolutely a selection you can absolutely make. And we do want to get your votes in here because this really helps us to map this presentation to you. If this is a case where the majority of you are reader response card driven, this is something that's helpful because we can continue to focus on our Good Housekeeping, Texas Monthly, Sunset Magazine examples. If you guys are purchasing lists, great. Let us know so we can get you not to do that and talk to you about that as well. So with that said, I'm seeing 79% of our population has voted. Wonderful.
Nice.
I love the fact that you guys are voting, and we will be closing the poll because of that in 3 seconds. So get your votes in. Our fabulous attendees. 3, 2, 1, and closed. So Robin, number 1 with a bullet, 64%.
Reader response.
Reader response. Number 2 is state/country tourism departments with 41%. And then coming in third are third-party events with 36% in that situation. So thank you guys for letting us know that. And of course, that now allows us to focus the presentation on those reader response cards.
Perfect. All right. So getting your data and then evaluating it. So one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that you're getting express consent correctly. Have your contacts reached out to you and said, yes, they are definitely interested in hearing from you about specific data or specific information. I'm stumbling on my words here.
Oh, you're doing good.
So valid consent in given writing or orally. And I'm sorry, I'm probably going to end up reading most of this just because it's a lot of words, not always easy to remember. So remember, when you're gathering consent, express consent is the recipient has given you a positive or explicit indication of consent to receive commercial electronic messages. So in other words, they are saying that you do have permission to email them. So they've said yes. And that again is based off of written or oral consent. Express consent is not time limited. And I'm kind of jumping all over the place, it looks like. So we go from a valid consent written in writing or orally. And then we have the express consent, which is not time limited. So are we still talking about the same thing here?
We are. So what's important to note with this, guys, is that when you get any type of information, whether it's from reader response cards, third-party events, or maybe it's your own event. That's one thing to point out. Some people say, well, we do our own expo, we have drawing slips. That still is kind of the same idea. A trade show, a conference, same idea in that vein. Also, it could be a case where we talk about purchase lists. This is where the purchase list, we are recommending you consider not using these unless you know exactly how that person became part of it. Did they get the express consent? Now, express consent, what that means is that I have given this to you without any issues or harassment to give this to me. It wasn't like I badgered the person. I said, yes, I would like to get information about this, or I am agreeing to this.
Perfect.
And it also is very clear. The clear is important here because sometimes when you get information on these reader response cards or these other places, it's going to say, send me information. But information about what is the real key thing to remember here. So is this, please send me a visitor's guide? Yes, that's a clear ask because that knows that person will get a mailed visitor's guide or maybe a PDF, but still a visitor's guide. Okay. Same situation. if this is a case where you say, send me emails about what? From whom? Now, that's also key here, is that who are we agreeing to get the emails from or communications from? Is it from you, the DMO, or is it from your hotels and your restaurants? They have to agree to each one of those asks. And that point that they say here, express consent is not time limited, that's one of the wonderful things about express consent. Once they give you express consent, you have it until they forego it. So if I die today and I gave you express consent, that's when my express consent ends. But if I live for the next 70 years, which I hope to do, then I have given you express consent to email me about that thing for the next 70 years. There's no time limitation.
Unless you opt out, is that correct?
Exactly. And that's the key, is that, as you've probably heard in many different scenarios, no means no. So if someone says, I don't want this, I need to unsubscribe, of course, time limitation does not matter in this case because they said no.
Gotcha.
But you have to get express consent in a lot of cases to be frequently emailing people. And it's something to very clearly check on when you get these lists. Did they give you express consent or even a form of consent before you're sending communication to them?
Okay, so is there ever a chance that someone could get a list like that and it be an implied consent? An implied consent, as outlined below, is it has a time period associated with it. So I would assume that if you're getting a list from a third party, there is no implied consent. It is express consent. Is it safe to assume that?
That's a great question. So if you move to the next slide, we have some examples of how implied consent could be given. So let's say that I made a purchase. And that's like I walked into your shop and I buy a piece of bubble gum. Essentially, I'm also getting implied consent for you to send me communications about that gum. Gotcha. The same situation, if I download your visitor's guide, now I can email you when I come out with a new edition of that visitor's guide. If I give you a business card and say, I'm going to email you about this topic we've had a conversation about, that also is implied consent in those situations. So what it does is it's assuming an agreement based on prior actions and activities.
Oh, that was a big sentence. Can you say that slower? One more time.
Assuming agreement based on prior interactions or activities.
Perfect.
So
I like it.
Think about this. Like, let's say that me and Robin go to lunch every single day for 2 straight weeks. That means that I could potentially assume that that third week on that Monday, we're going to go to lunch again. But she didn't agree to it. She didn't say explicitly, yes, we will be going to lunch on this Monday. But because of prior actions, prior activities, one can have implied consent.
Nice.
That's how this goes into it. Now, it's still always best to get express because implied consent does go away. Okay. So let's say I download your visitor's guide or I opt in to something with a reader response card. This is a case where now I have 2 years to talk to you about this. And then if I never make that action again, now I'm foregoing the consent because it's basically saying that there is some time boundaries associated with that
interaction. Is this applicable across the board? I mean, is this Canada? Is this US? Is this New Zealand? Who is this applying to?
Great question. So a lot of these are tied back to Canadians' anti-spam legislation.
Okay.
And Canada does have the most stringent, the most regulatory form of anti-spam legislation. But what that means is if you follow this, you're safe everywhere.
Got it.
So if you follow this rule and you're emailing a bunch of people in Norway, or you're emailing a bunch of people in Brazil or Mexico, as long as you're following these rules, you're actually going to be compliant with most countries' spam laws.
Gotcha.
From what we've done in research. Veronica, who works with us, she's an email marketing specialist. She's actually done research, I think, on 12 or 13 different countries' spam laws. Canada's is the strongest, and as you follow Canada's, you're really compliant.
Got it. Great to know.
Yeah. So the key thing here, guys, is be careful with the language and when someone opt in, what are we actually agreeing to?
Okay. So in other words, you've got that sheet. You got to know where you got it from, what kind of consent you have, what you're going to do with that data later on. So all of these slides here, everything that we're talking about what you want to do with that data later on. So you're looking at that explicit consent versus the implied consent. What are you going to do with it later on? When you put in your fields and you're mapping that data through, are you doing it correctly in regards to that implied or expressed consent?
Exactly. And that's one thing to be very careful with, is that I have seen it before, and several of our trainers have seen it as well, where when we get a reader response card, we just automatically send them a visitor's guide. But if a person didn't actually explicitly say, with express consent, I want a visitor's guide, they said, I want information. this is a case where maybe sending them a one-time opt-in to say, hey, we got your information from Good Housekeeping.
Interesting.
Please let us know if you would like to receive the following communications from us. And then saying, I have a visitor's guide. Then saying, I have a email newsletter that we send out maybe on a monthly, quarterly basis. Maybe there's upcoming restaurant week. All three of those are three different asks. You can't just say, now you're opting into all three.
So what Sam is saying here is you're taking that data, you're importing that spreadsheet. You've got all those contacts. You've tagged them. You've marked them. You have all the data in there. Once you've compiled that list of all the data you've imported, what you want to do then later on is maybe send out an email that talks about, hey, we've got all these options. What would you like to do? Do you want to receive a mailed visitor guide? Do you want a digital one? Do you want us to send you other information? So in other words, you're not doing everything from CRM other than putting in your data first initially and then later on determining what you're going to do with it and sending maybe a follow-up email. And of course, that would be a whole nother conversation because you're building an email and you don't always want to do that in CRM or send it out.
Exactly. And you can see here on the language that we have here on the slide, guys, the one thing that I really want you to look at here is this word that says assume, and the word right next to it, nothing.
Yep.
Assume nothing.
Assume nothing.
Because assuming is implied consent.
Okay.
And if I were just to look at you like, would you like to get lunch? And you just look at me, I could say that she consented. But did she? No, she didn't say it.
Got it.
So that's the key thing, is we want to get explicit, express consent when we do this. Now, one thing just want to say before we move forward, and also just protect ourselves, is we're not lawyers. So one thing to be
not
careful
in this lifetime.
So while we're giving you best advice based upon how we have perceived the written law in various countries, if you're saying to yourself, I would like to get legal counsel around what Sam and Robin have talked about today, great, you should. But we're not using this as legal information. This is inspiration for you to evaluate how you are collecting data and whether you're going to be legally safe in any way when you do decide to communicate with the people you're importing.
Okay. Sam, do we have any recorded webinars or do we have any scheduled ones on the Canadian anti-spam law?
Luckily, we do, Robin.
Yay!
So we do have a link to that actually at the end of this deck here. So when you get the PDFs and all that, that's going to be there. Also, one thing that's a nice little segue to that is in your GoToWebinar, there's a little handout section. You can actually download the slide deck for this. So if you want to follow along on your own or click any of the links we're going to be showing here, you can do that at any time. Perfect. So let's ask a question.
Yes, let's go. Question time. He likes it when you answer questions, just to let you know.
I do.
It's the highlight of his day.
So what we're asking here is based upon what we talked about, explicit, express consent, implied consent. Were you familiar with what we've talked about around Canada's anti-spam legislation before today? Is it a case where, yes, you're actively working on staying compliant? And why we have actively working as the language there is that we can't guarantee that you're completely compliant. Because once again, not lawyers.
Yep.
But if you're actively working on it, you're aware of it, you're doing work to try to be compliant, that's an excellent step in the right direction. Maybe it's a case where you need some assistance with being compliant. That's wonderful because our analysts all know about this. We can advise you on updating your forms, updating all of the ways that you're collecting data. That's something that would be done here. Maybe it's a case where you're not concerned about being compliant. If that's the case, we probably need to have a one-on-one conversation so I can make sure you understand why you should be concerned. Because one thing to be aware of here is that if you are sued by anybody in Canada for spamming them, it costs up to $1 to $10 million per violation per person.
Wow.
Think about all of those wonderful bed taxes we collect, all of those wonderful membership partnership dues, and sending those up to Canada because you couldn't follow the legislation properly.
Yeah.
I really hope that if you are putting not concerned about being compliant, you're just being funny.
Yeah.
Now, if this is news to you, yes, this is great. I'm glad that we constantly beat this Canada anti-spam legislation drum so that you're aware of it. Or no, but you're also not concerned. Once again, we probably need to talk.
Yeah.
So, with that said, I'm going to close the poll because we have over 70% of our population have voted. If you haven't gotten your vote in, we're going to be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and close. And Robin, while this is not music to my ears, this is definitely music to my eyes. Where I can see that 67% are actively working on staying compliant.
Nice.
So thank you. This will keep you safe with all we're trying to do.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Let's talk about getting this data ready for importing.
That's the fun part. This is the part that I like. I know it's weird. It's weird. I like data. I like manipulating. I like the
That's why you're
spreadsheets.
here.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
This is my ball right here. This is my game. So he got all the Canadian anti-spam questions, and I get all the data mapping questions. So we're getting your data ready, right? So you're getting a spreadsheet. Hopefully you're getting a spreadsheet from a third-party vendor. They've already put it in a CSV file format. If they have not, if they've given you an Excel spreadsheet and you need to go through and get that data updated and you need the file saved into that new format, I'll show you how to do that. But ultimately, the very first thing you need to know is that the spreadsheet, the data that you need to import, has to be in that CSV file format. And like I said, I'll demonstrate that here in just a few minutes. But key point, if you have a spreadsheet, the very first thing you will probably want to do is make sure that it is in a CSV format, and then you start manipulating all your data and cleaning up all your columns.
And one thing that's really important to note with this is that a lot of times, let's say if you're getting from a trade show or response, they might give it to you in Excel format.
Yeah.
And it's easy to convert it back to this
very
just through
easy.
save as. So
Yeah.
it's not a situation where you need to go back to the trade show or the response
Absolutely
and
not.
say, send me a new CSV.
Yeah.
It's something that you can absolutely handle on your own, which
Yeah.
Robin will walk through.
Yeah, so even if you go to a trade center yourself and you've got, or trade show, sorry, you go to the show yourself and you've got in an Excel spreadsheet format initially, that's fine. Just remember, you'll want to change that later on into a CSV file format. And then again, I'll show you that here in just a few minutes. So that CSV format, that spreadsheet, one of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure that your headers at the top of the spreadsheet are column labels particular to the fields that you're mapping in CRM. So in other words, in consumer specifically, what you're doing is you're creating inquiries and you're creating contacts. Those contact fields, those inquiry fields that you're creating during your import are going to be set up in the system based off of the column names that you have in your spreadsheet. So as an example here, you're seeing a column that's called first name and you have last name company. Each of these column names are going to tell the system, hey, this is the field in CRM that I want to map to. So in other words, system, when you look at my spreadsheet, look for this field in CRM and pull in this data. So just keep that in mind as we're rolling through here. You need to get those columns named correctly so that you know how to use them later on, okay? Worst case scenario, they're not named correctly, and I'll show you how to fix that. So that when you are actually doing the import, even if they're not named correctly, it's okay. However, to make your job easier, you want to make sure that those columns are named correctly. All right, so the next part, and I meant to do a demo, so let's look at a spreadsheet that I have here for you guys, and let's see, which one is the correct one?
That's this first one.
This is the first one. So this is the spreadsheet that I received from my third-party vendor, Texas Monthly. This is a reader response spreadsheet. When I'm looking at this, and I'm just going to expand out my columns here just so I can see everything. Notice I have first, last, contact, title, company, address. All of these fields here all exist in CRM. So these fields themselves and the way they're labeled on the columns makes sense to me, but the system itself doesn't necessarily understand what you're doing or what you want to pull in. So what I would recommend doing is have a column that says first name. You have a column that says last name. In our system, when you're building a contact record, you also need to have address, all your address boxes. You have an address 1, you have an address 2, you have an address 3. You have billing, you have shipping, and you have physical. One of the things the system is going to do is it's going to look at these fields, these columns, these header names, and it's going to say, okay, well, you want address 1 mapped to physical address 1 of a contact record. So I'm going to flip over to our CRM just so you can kind of get a preview of what this looks like. So in the consumer module, you have a contact that gets created. When you create the contact, you have a first name, you have a last name, you have a full name, and then down here, you have physical, billing, and shipping addresses. What the system is going to try to do is it's going to look at your spreadsheet and it's going to see address 1 and it's going to go, oh, hey, I think you want to put it here, here, and here. So that's address 1 of every single one of those address types, which is fine. However, nowhere in my spreadsheet does it indicate to the system what my address 2 or my address 3 is. And additionally, okay, so what I would do is I would add a column here. I'd insert, whoops, of course I have to do it in the right spot. Let me do it over here. I do address 2, and it helps if I know how to type. So address 2, and then I would have another column that says address 3. So going through and making sure that you have as many fields as possible mapped within the spreadsheet before you go and do your import in CRM is going to make your job a lot easier. A couple other things that I want to point out. So within my spreadsheet here, see how the state name, we have state initials and then we also have a state name. If I were to take this import right now and try to have the system look at it, it's going to tell me that I have invalid data. When you're doing state codes, when you're doing the state field in your address mapping, you want to make sure you're doing the state code or the state name written all the way out. You can't have both. It's one or the other, okay? So in other words, if you have state codes here, you need to turn that into a state code down here.
That's a really important point that you just made here, guys.
Very
I hope
important.
that you heard that.
Yeah.
So as you can see, we want to make sure that it's uniform, and that's the key thing here. So,
Yep.
And if you're not sure what the state codes are, it's going to be the same as it's going to be written for a mailing address.
Absolutely.
So it's good. So for North Carolina, NC, for Georgia, GA,
Yep.
and make sure it's that way. Or you can spell them out, but just make sure it's either or, not
Exactly.
intermingled.
Yeah, exactly. So everything needs to be exactly alike. He used a good word. One of my favorite words, uniform. It's a military thing, and I use it all the time. I didn't this time, though.
No, I love it, though.
He stole my thunder. No, I'm kidding. All right. So another thing that you want to focus in on is the country. So when you are doing a mapping of data, one of the things that you want to keep in mind is it's in Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., we all use zip codes. Does Mexico? Mexico does, right? Okay. So when you're filling out your spreadsheet and you've got this spreadsheet that's full of data, you hopefully have Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. all in one spreadsheet, and then you have everybody else in another one. So in other words, if I were to take this spreadsheet right now and I had New Zealand in here and I had China in here and I had Korea in here and I had the U.S. and Mexico and Canada, one of the things the system does is it tries to be smart for you. Again, it looks at your state codes and it looks at your zip codes and it looks at the country. One of the easiest things that you can do for yourself for future imports is to make sure that you're using domestic on one spreadsheet and everybody else on the other. Not that we're trying to be picky or be mean to anybody, but what happens is because the system, again, is trying to be smart for you, it looks at your country code. It says, okay, this is United States. Because it's United States, I know that I can use the zip code and I can use the state. However, if you have someone other than the U.S. in here or Canada or Mexico, if it does not have a zip code, so if you have like Korea and there is no zip code associated there, the system's going to give you an error message. And that's probably one of the most commonly asked questions is, why am I getting error messages? More often than not, it's because you've got your international people along with your domestic people on one spreadsheet. So if you do have multiple sources that are giving you data, if there's a way for you to take that data and separate it out from domestic to international, I guarantee you it's going to make your job so much easier during this import process.
Excellent tip.
Yes.
Excellent tip. Hope you guys were writing that one down.
Yeah, it's not something that's always covered, but one of the things that you really want to make sure that you do is keep notes on something like that, because that's something that's going to be very important to you later on. And the error codes usually give you enough information that you can kind of troubleshoot, but not all the time.
Right.
Okay. So going back to that country topic, here in my spreadsheet, I've got country as USA. Is there anything wrong with that? Probably not. I don't know. I see USA. I know what it means.
Yeah.
The problem is our CRM doesn't recognize USA. It recognizes United States. So if you're going to have country in here, make sure that the country name is written all the way out. Canada can't be the Canadian code, which I don't even know. And USA cannot be USA. It has to be United States. So if you, in your spreadsheet, when you receive it from your third-party vendor, make sure the country name is written all the way out. If you have it in here and you don't want to use it, that's fine. You can leave that column in here. So in other words, we've got this full sheet here. We've got a lot of columns here. We're not going to use all of this information. So if you know for a fact that this country column right here is all messed up and the data in there is weird or wrong, don't worry about it. If you're going to map it later on during your import process, you definitely want to clean it up. But as of right now, I know for a fact that I do want to use that column. So I am going to update this. And know that if you have someone that's blank here and everybody else is exactly the same, it's going to give you an error as well. So country. I want country written out. I'm going to do United States. And it's fun trying to do this during a presentation. All right. So something that you have to spell United correctly too. Wow. testing my skills today. All right, so when you're going into the system and you are updating your columns, one of the things that you may not know about Excel that I just learned recently and I love, so if you're on a box and you want all the columns below it to have exactly the same value, you take your cursor, you click or you hover down here in the bottom right hand corner of your screen or that box, you double click, it is going to move it down. And actually, you should be able to do it all the way down. I messed it up. Yep, it's proved me wrong. There we go. We'll do it that way. There we go. I clicked enough times that it finally did it, but initially...
That's a pretty good Excel tip.
Yeah, that's an awesome tip, and I just learned that one recently. I've been using Excel for years, and now I'm finding out.
I didn't know that one. I mean, what I would have suggested is just find and replace.
You could do find and replace, absolutely.
But I like this. If you're a power user of Excel and you want to make it very simple without any typing, I love it.
And there's another thing you could do as well. So if you do have blanks here, and you copy that top box, so I do a Control-C, and then I highlight all the boxes below that I want to receive that value.
You get to paste.
Control-V.
Yep. It's an excellent, excellent tool here.
Yep.
Now, one person is asking a question here as we're focusing on country spellings. Is there a list of accessible countries listings, spellings that we have, like references like the analysts use?
There kind of sort of is, but not really. So we can get you a list. We don't have anything in CRM, but worst case scenario, and I'm going to change over to my CRM real quick. Worst case scenario, if you're curious, you could always come to one of the address fields within the system, and these are all the country codes that we supply. I don't know that we have a hard-coded list stored anywhere in CRM for your reference, but what we'll do is we'll keep in touch with you. I'll gather your information and I'll make sure that I get a list to you if we do have one, or I'll reach out to your CRM analyst and have them in touch with you.
I like this tip though. Like if you're ever saying what should it be called, because this is a drop-down, that's a core drop-down for the system, this does let you know. So it's not United States of America, we use United States.
Yep.
And then you can look at it directly from here. So as long as you're copying it directly from here, you should be safe.
Yep. And one of the things to keep in mind is because we are tour and travel centric, our system is based off of DMAI standards in a lot of our modules. So these specific, I can't talk today, these specific country codes are being sent to us based off of what DMAI has. So other imports in the system would recognize these country codes as well, or these country names, because DMAI uses them based off of this. DMAI doesn't call us United States of America, it's just United States. So that would probably be why it says United States. But again, we'll be in touch with you on that one, okay? Good question, very good question. All right, so where was I, Sam?
So we've talked about zips, we've talked about countries. I think you were moving over to talk about email addresses.
Yeah, email addresses. So you don't always get email addresses. It's not that big of a deal. Depending on whether or not you're going to be using that data later on to send out email communications, then it would be important. One of the things that I love about the consumer module is that the consumer or the contacts that get created during your import, they use that email address along with the person's name and their I think it's the physical address on the contact record to see whether or not they already exist in the system. So in other words, George W. Brown, let's say he came into my system 3 years ago due to an import. My system is my import today process, what it's going to do is it's going to look at that email address that's associated with George today, along with his name and his addresses, and it's going to look and say, hey, I think George already exists in your system. So that's going to be our chance to do a duplicate check, review our records, and go through to see whether or not these people already exist. If they're returning to us, great. If not, that's okay too, maybe in the future. But know that we use that email address, first name, last name, and physical address to determine whether or not people are coming back to you repeatedly. And yes, that does work along with your forms. So if you guys have any website forms and you're collecting data through there, any address information or any email address information they put in there is automatically getting put into your consumer module. If we're also importing them from a third-party vendor, guess what? It gets to do the duplicate check. So it's going to all end up in the same spot. You're going to get all those inquiries listed on that original contact record. So I'm talking really fast. I'm getting really speedy, and I'm missing one major thing that I like to point out that not a lot of people do. So your first name and your last name is probably the only thing that you ever get in regards to someone's name when you're doing your import from your third-party vendor. I don't like the fact that they only give you first name and last name, and then you have to make a whole nother column for your full name. I have a cute little tool, or I'm sorry, Excel does, cute little tool called concatenate. It's a formula. The system, what it's going to do is it allows you to put in this formula concatenate, and combine these two columns here on the left-hand side. I'm not too adverse on doing it really quickly, so I'm not going to show it to you. But one of the things I want to let you guys know is that when you go in and you are doing your imports, one of the things I really recommend is doing a first name and last name concatenation into a full name column. So hopefully I wasn't speaking Greek. Hopefully everybody out there understood that. If not, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to make sure that we have some of that information for you later on. So if you have any questions, we're going to hopefully update our knowledge base documents to have that for you. So in other words, first name, last name, full name. You want all three, not just the two. Address information. You want address 1, address 2, address 3. Even if 2 and 3 are blank, it's going to make your job so much easier later on when you do your import. Country codes written all the way out. You want the country name written all the way out. Email addresses, hopefully you have them. All right, so I have a clean one. I've already done all that hard work. I've got another spreadsheet I wanted to show you guys. So this is the before, this is the after. So as I look at this guy and I expand out my columns, I have a first name, I have a last name, I have a full name, address 1, address 2, address 3, United States, email address. So all of that information.
Nice and clean.
Nice and clean.
Yeah, and so some of the key things that she was talking about, like we were saying, we're not walking through how to use the Excel to concatenate.
Right.
But it is something where Microsoft has tons of material on how to do that. Yep. And if you ever need to have someone actually sit down and walk you through it, sure, we'd be happy to use your support hours to show you how to use concatenate Excel.
Yep.
But with that said, one of the things to also be careful of here is, as an example, when you take a look at the first name, you're going to notice that we have George W., we have Jennifer, we have Glenn, we have Mrs. Jackie. What happens when you see things like that?
Oh, that's a very good question. So this is your personal preference, okay? If a guy comes to you and he fills out a form on your website and you've only given him first name and last name and he likes to be called George W. Bush or George W. Brown, he doesn't have an option to put in his middle initial. So the system's going to do this to you. If you want to take the effort of splitting out that information, by all means do it. In other words, you're going to end up having to add another column, and then you're going to, there's another code in here that allows you to actually split out this data so that W, due to the space, would end up showing up in another column. Can't remember the name of that particular function, but it's something in Excel, along with the Mrs. So the Mrs. is obviously a title. That's what she wants to be known as. It's her prefix. That would be another column that you would want to add in there. All of that can be done in Excel as a formula, not necessarily something that I'm concerned about doing today. I'm okay with Mrs. Jackie being her first name and George W. being his name. But again, if you want to separate it out, it's definitely something that you can do in Excel. I can't remember the codes off the top of my head, but that's something there that you can definitely Google, and Excel can teach you how to do it.
So something that somebody's brought up here, and I feel like we may have either glossed over the point or at least we need to restate this.
Okay.
Why would we need to concatenate to have a first name, last name, but also be importing a full name field?
Very, very good question. Thank you. So it's assumed a lot of the times that if you have someone that you're importing, their first name and last name, that when that contact record gets built, the full name's going to automatically get populated. Not the case. So in other words, in CRM, contact record, in the consumer module, has a first name, they have a last name. That's the only field, those are the only fields that I'm telling the system to populate. If at any point in time you decide that you want to go in and edit that contact record for whatever reason, the full name column or full name entry would be blank because the system did not create that contact record with the full name, only the first name and the last name. Same thing later on if you just want to look at all your data. You've only pulled in first name and last name. This system is not going to automatically create full name on that contact record, and that's why you'd want to do that.
Right, and that's the case where if you did ever want to send them a communication where then you said send them as the full name or send it as the first name, last name, it helps to have both in those situations. Right. And we have some people coming in and saying, well, I've never added a full name column. Well, you don't need to. You don't need to. But you want to try to have as much information as you can, putting it in from an import into CRM. Yep. And this is one of the ways you can do that if you do ever need to be actionable with the full name field. Yep,
absolutely. So again, that full name field, it's required field. If you want to use it later on, or if you want to just go to your contacts grid view here in the system, if you've only done first name and last name, you're going to end up with blanks on this contact name list here because the full name is what pulls in here. So just keep in mind that with the system, when it's creating that contact record, it only does first name and last name. If you tell it to, it will not create a full name. Okay.
Great questions that have been coming in from the community. What we're going to do is at this point, because we have a couple other topics we want to get through, I'm going to hold the questions that are here, but we will address them towards the end.
Perfect.
So some of the things that Rob is going to be pointing out on getting your data imported is there are some common upload issues. So let's go over and take a look at those and see what we've got here. So
there we go.
The first one, duplicate column names are not allowed. The column name, no name, is a duplicate. What does that mean?
That means that you have mapped your column wrong, or the data is bad. So in other words, the system is looking at your spreadsheet and it's looking at the column names. If you've got one column in there that's named the same way, so if you've got full name in there twice, or if you've got first name in there twice, or if you've got address 3 in there twice, what it's going to do is it's going to look at it and say, okay, you've got the same one in here. I can't map it because I'm seeing that same column name twice. Another option here is it maybe because you've got special characters in there, or if you have empty columns. So in other words, you're telling the system to map something that doesn't actually exist. So the duplicate column names is telling you that you've got duplicate column names. Literally, that means that your columns have been named twice the same way. And in the next one, we have one or more of your columns appear to be in a format that we cannot support. That's going to be based off of special characters in that column name or within the fields themselves. So if you're going in, you're trying to import like an ampersand, there's a chance that if that ampersand is somewhere in that column, it's giving you that error because of that.
And also remember, spaces in the world of code is actually seen as pieces of code. Yep. So that's how the system's interpreting it. So there could be a case where you just got a spreadsheet and then someone on column 50 decided to hit the space bar. Now that's coming through as something that the system's trying to analyze.
Yep, exactly.
So trying to go through and find those is the way it'll do. But normally the system will also point out which column, what rows they're having issues with. So it's not going to just be like, one of the columns, go find it. They normally will pinpoint what happens.
It sometimes does. Sometimes it's a little ambiguous. But one of the things I want to key in here is it's not a space within that column header. It's actually a space at the beginning.
Correct.
So if you're doing a space full name and it sees that column name as space full name, it's kicking off of that the space at the beginning, not the space in between full name.
Yep.
Okay.
And with the duplicate column name situation, that's a case where sometimes you're going to get the physical address and the billing address and the shipping address, but all three of the fields are named address, address, address.
Exactly.
So that's where you're just going in and adding what it is, physical address, billing, and shipping will then prevent that duplicate column name from happening.
Exactly right. All right. So one of the things that we like to offer you guys here at Simple View is a simple way of doing things. I love our company name for that reason. So, when you're doing your import process, you also have the chance to set up templates. So in other words, what a template is you're going in, you're telling the system, this is my spreadsheet. These are all my column names. And oh, by the way, when I do this again in 3 months, I want to be able to do exactly the same, but I don't want to have to do all this clicking. So for those of you who have gone through and done an import in the past, your import process, one of the steps at the very beginning, it asks you whether or not you want to create a template or whether or not you're going to be using a template. Creating a template allows you to take that same spreadsheet or a similar spreadsheet in the same format 3 months from now and do the import process again without you having to do a mapping of all those fields. Additionally, minimizes errors. Who likes errors? No one likes errors. So if you've got a template and you know for a fact 3 months from now, in your July Texas Monthly import, you want to do your import again using the same template format. You'll want to say yes, you'll want to create a template, and then 3 months from now when you do that import, you're going to see that template option and you're going to be able to reduce the time that you spent initially creating that template, and you're going to reduce any errors. So this is the step that I'm talking about. When you guys go in and you first go in, I'm going to be redundant here. When you go in, you do your import process. The very first thing that it's going to ask you is whether or not you want to use that import template, whether or not you want to edit an existing template. All of these questions here are going to be there to help you prepare yourself for doing the imports in the future. So one of the things that I'll show you as well. It looks like we might be running out of time, huh?
Oh, we're doing good.
Okay. Whew. All right. How about we give you a question while I rest here?
Yeah. So as we've gone through import templates in this case, and I do want to point out, this is something that you totally have for free inside of your consumer user group. We're not trying to sell you anything here. It's just a nice, useful tool. And we're going to ask you, have you ever used this before? So maybe, yes, I love import templates. I actually am getting married to one next year.
That's
and congratulations for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love is love, people. Love is love. Maybe it's a case where, yes, I need assistance with building and using my import templates. If that's the case, let us know. If you do say that, that probably means that we'll reach out to your analyst and have them reach out to you to set up some training time in that case. Maybe it's no, but they look like they're a great tool. I'm excited to start using these. Great. That means you're self-sufficient. You're going to start working on this. No, but that's because you need some help.
Yep.
Or no, I do not use them and they do not look helpful. If that's the case, I would imagine it's probably a case where you're importing them from multiple sources all the time, where you're not getting a very consistent flow. Yep. So with re-response cards, this is one of the areas that re-response cards help with a lot, because this is a situation where if you get a quarterly pump from Good Housekeeping, you're probably going to get another quarterly one.
Exactly right.
It'll probably be the exact same fields.
Yep.
So if you're saying they don't look helpful, it's probably because you're getting your data from all sorts of different areas and it's not consistent. So therefore, a template to create consistency may not be useful.
Perfect.
I get it. So 81% have voted. Oh, my heart feels full. Thank you. Let's close this poll in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. And what's interesting, Robin, is that it's either a case where people are in love with them and there's going to be so many fall weddings, wonderful, or they need some assistance in building them out.
Okay.
But everybody seems to like them. So, except for a small few, you 5%, but I know you 5% are wonderful people. So, let's move forward.
Okay, so we closed the poll, and now we're moving on to doing best practices for data mapping and doing your duplicate merging. So, we're talking a lot about all the data and what you want to do with it and how you want to map it into the system and what you're going to do with it later on. When you're going in and you're mapping your fields, one of the things that you need to make sure that you're doing is if you're mapping your fields and it's a drop-down value, you need to make sure that that value already exists in CRM. So in other words, maybe you're wanting to import a custom field on your contact record, and the custom field has to do with a single option in the drop down for interests in, let's say, their local farmers market. Okay, so it's a local interest for you guys' city. It's a drop down value. You want to be able to import that data successfully, so you've got a reader response. Their column says this is a consumer interest. If you don't have farmers market as an option in a drop down in your CRM, you're not going to be able to successfully import the data. So in other words, if you want to import to a drop-down field within CRM, you need to make sure that value already exists, because the system cannot create it for you upon import process.
Right. So like if you had farmers markets that people were saying in Good Housekeeping, but then you knew that you ultimately call that like outdoor and agricultural or something like that, then make sure it's called that when you import it.
Exactly right.
So don't use the language that's there, use the language that's in CRM.
Exactly right. Yep. So, none of the import fields match a CRM field. Select none from the drop-down menu. So this is kind of an obscure one. So what they're saying here is, if you've got a spreadsheet and you've got lots of data there and you're not using all of those fields or all of that column data within your import, then you're going to ignore it. So in other words, you've got extra data within the spreadsheet, but also within CRM. Maybe there's fields within your CRM you don't want to map to. So yes, there's a chance that there's a company field that's in your spreadsheet, but you don't want to import that into your data in CRM. So when you do your field mappings, you're going to want to say none in that dropdown.
Exactly.
And to kind of give you a screenshot of what that looks like. So in other words, here on this screen, I've got contact mappings. Here on the left-hand side, these are the fields as they exist in CRM. These are the labels for the fields in CRM. So this is the destination field. You can't really see the text very well here. I might have to update that. Okay. So the destination field here, this is the CRM field on the contact record itself. What I'm doing is I'm telling the system that this column name here in my spreadsheet is what I want to import into this field in CRM. So there where it says status, it says none, because I don't want to import anything into that field. It's not something that I'm concerned with. It's not anything that I'm providing in my spreadsheet. So in other words, I've got first name, last name, full name, issue title. I'm not sure that that's right. So I might have to update that later on in my spreadsheet, or I'm going to update it here within my import process. And I maybe change that to no, because I don't really want issue title here. I don't think issue title has anything to do with the person. So you would change that to none. In other words, you have fields in CRM that you don't have to map to, and you have data in your spreadsheet you do not have to import. Two things you want to keep in mind. Your spreadsheet needs to be in the same exact format, column-wise, in the future if you're going to be using templates. So as long as your spreadsheet columns themselves are all in the same format for the next template import, then you'll be fine. Just keep in mind that all of the data that you have in that spreadsheet is going to be either ignored or not ignored based off of what you're doing here on this screen. The first column on the left has to do with the contact fields that you're importing. The one on the right has to do with the inquiries. So again, the left-hand side is the field in CRM. The right-hand side is your data within your spreadsheet.
All of this makes sense.
I hope
Good
so.
job.
I hope so. All right. So one of the things that I get caught on a lot when I do my imports is I forget that my spreadsheet doesn't have all the data in it that I need. There are certain fields in CRM that are required at a contact level or an inquiry level. And if you're not importing that data through your spreadsheet, the system's going to tell you. That's what this screen here is doing. So by default, what the system wants is they always want to know whether or not the send email value is being provided.
Yes.
They also want to know send fax. I know that's kind of antiquated, but it's there. So make sure that send fax is no, because we don't really use faxes anymore unless you really do, and then you want to say yes, but you can't fax out of CRM. However, the send email is really important. Again, this is your explicit versus implied consent. If you're gathering email addresses, you've got their implied consent. Is that correct? Yes, implied consent. So that means you should be able to click send email yes on all of these records. So in other words, your spreadsheet, you're importing it. In the spreadsheet, you do not have send email as an option as one of the columns, okay? What the system is doing here is it's giving you the chance to say, hey, you don't have this field mapped. What do you want to do? So what I'm doing with the system here is I'm telling the system for every single contact record that we're importing today, set their send email box to yes or no. In this particular case, based off of the screenshot, everybody would be imported with send email no.
Got it.
Okay. One other field down below that you may not ever really think about, but it's the status on the contact record. Contact records are always going to need to have a specific status associated with them that tells the system whether or not they're active, whether or not you can email them. That's all going to be affected based off of that status right there. So again, if you don't have that field mapped on your spreadsheet, you're going to need to make sure you identify that, hey, I didn't put it in my spreadsheet, but today when I do this import, I need everybody who's imported to have a status of active or inactive, whatever your preference is, probably active. Same thing with inquiry. So inquiry type is required, and so is inquiry date. So inquiry date's actually a pretty nice one. I like this one, and a lot of people have questions on this. So this is important if you're using templates. If you use a template and you have inquiry date and you put a date in here, that date stays hard-coded in the template, okay? So if you're doing a template, you always want to do current date on this selection, and the reason why is because if 5 months from now you do that template, use that template, and you have that hard-coded date in there, it's always going to be that date, and that's not accurate.
Important fact, guys.
Very important, especially if you want to do reader responses surveys later on. Yes.
Yes, and
okay.
The inquiry date important for so many reasons, but it is one of the few areas that I've seen that massive mistakes have happened around with importing.
Yep.
So anything you can be doing to get that tight, including what Robin has shared, is a great tip.
Yep. All right. And moving over to the next one. So we're looking at the duplicate option here. So this is where the system's going in. It's looking at the contact name. It's looking at the email address, and it's looking at the physical address. And it's determining whether or not that person is a duplicate. So they're telling you, hey, I think there's a chance that this person already exists in the system. What do you want to do? In my particular case, I always want to look at my duplicates. So I always choose import with duplicate check. What the system does is then gives you the information. Based off of everything that you just tried to import, it's going to show this. So it's going to say the very first person, this person already exists in your system. They had an inquiry back in November of 2015. I think it's the same person. Is it? And you're going to say, yes, it's the same person, or it's not. So an example of how this could work for you or against you. Let's say Glenn Jacobs and his wife, Stephanie Jacobs, share the same email address. If Stephanie existed in your system and had an email address the same as Glenn's, what would happen is the system would say, hey, they had the same email address. Are they the same person? What do you want to do? and I go, well, it's not the same person, even though it is the same email address. So I would add anyway, because I want Glenn to be in there and I want his wife to be in there. If, however, it's saying Glenn Jacobs and the addresses all match up and the email address is good, then you want to do merge. What it's going to do is it's going to keep from creating Glenn twice. It's going to take today's inquiry import and last year's or 2015's inquiry import and merge them all together in one record. So keep in mind, you want to review that duplicate process. Don't skip it unless later on you want to do a batch merge. And that's a whole other topic as well. But know that it's there for you based off of email address, name, and physical address. So one of the things I wanted to review real quick is common mistakes. So you want to make sure that you're adding your contact tags during your import process. It's one of the fields that you get during your import process. It's one of the drop downs. So upon the initial import, the very first screen, it asks you whether or not you want to associate everybody with a specific contact tag or not. You always want to say yes. And the main reason why is because if you want to do any data analysis later on, or if you want to do any marketing campaigns based off of that tag, it's very important to have it. And look, there's that send email field again.
Yeah!
Yay! So the send email field, again, it's very important that you understand that if you're collecting email addresses, you've got implied consent. So if you have their implied consent that you want to say, update the contact record so the send email box is checkmarked, saying, yes, I have permission to email these people. It's very important for you, especially if you're going to be doing marketing campaigns. Again. All right. So allowing a field from the file to be mapped to multiple destinations is okay, kind of, sort of. So I'm going to clarify this. You've got an address column, address 1. You don't say in your spreadsheet that it's physical address or billing address or shipping address. However, you want that address 1 to be physical, shipping, and billing. You can't use that address 1. Well, you can, but you don't want to. Address 1 on your address 2 line and your address 3 line. The system's going to try to be smart for you. It's going to see that you only have one address column. It's going to take that column and shove it to address 1, address 2, address 3, physical, billing, and shipping.
Yep.
I hope I didn't lose you. Keep in mind, you want to try to have address 1, address 2, and address 3 in your spreadsheets. It's going to help avoid that. So in other words, you don't want address 1 mapped to 3 different fields on 3 different address boxes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. So moving on to the next one. Looks like we have another question.
All right, so last thing that we're going to have here, and we'll answer your guys' questions that are coming through here, but we want to quickly check, did you learn something here today? So on your screen, you can say, yes, I learned something. I have some great techniques that I feel I can use now. Maybe it's a case where you learned a lot, but now you need some personal training on the topic. You know that your situation is unique. It doesn't really fall into the best practices that maybe we covered here today. Let us know. We can always set up one-on-one conversations. Or maybe it's a case where, this presentation just wasn't useful to me. Maybe you signed up for something that you didn't expect to sign up for. Whatever it happens to be, let us know so that way we can determine whether we actually hit our mark with this presentation here today.
Absolutely.
And let us make sure that we are voting on this one, because it ultimately helps us determine whether we are doing a good job of these webinars and you're getting what you expect out of it.
Yeah.
So make sure you get your votes in. One question that did come in from our audience that we have that I think is going to be an easy one for you to answer. How do you mark the source of a request?
Oh, source of a request. That's a very good question. So one of the things that you can do during your mapping process is the source code. So let's say, for instance, you go through your import process and you want to be able to identify what the source code is for that particular import. That is actually a field during your import process, but I don't think it's here on the contact level. I think it might be on the inquiry level. Can never remember. Very good question. Put me on the spot. Oh, that's a very good question. So source code is definitely something that you would, you have the opportunity to do during the import process. I can't remember if it shouldn't be inquiry type. Wow, you did put me on the spot. So source code, couple of things I would recommend. You can do it as an inquiry type. If it's not a field during your import process, even though I think it might be, use it as the inquiry type. So in other words, you're doing the import process. You don't want all of them to be identified as import. Maybe you want all of them to be identified as reader responses. So all of these spreadsheets that you're getting from Texas Monthly should all be reader response imports. Not necessarily an import, but the reader response is exactly what you want. If you want to identify a specific third-party vendor that you're getting these from, then you would go through and use your tags. So in other words, it's Texas Monthly March,
Right.
Texas Monthly Quarterly, whatever. All of those import tags can be used to identify your individual third-party vendors, but the inquiry type itself is going to identify that generic source code. Hopefully I answered your question.
I thought you did. Okay. So that is good. So we've got a couple questions in from one of our friends over at Travel and County.
Okay.
So first one that he asked is, if first name, last name doesn't auto-populate in the full name field, is there any way to auto-populate the city/state when importing a batch of leads if I only have the zip code? So if you only have zip, would it come through as also the city and state?
Unfortunately, no. It's one of a common question. So when you're going in and similar to when you put it in a contact record, if you do a new contact, down here you have to choose a zip code. If you choose a zip code, the system's going to automatically populate for you. Same thing for you guys when you do your import. If you're only providing a zip code, the system's going to want to do this, but only upon save of the contact record. So in other words, you do your import, you only put in that zip code. You don't have a country code, you don't have a city, you don't have a state. The system's going to automatically allow you to put in that zip code, and then it's going to ask you what the country is later on. However, it will not put in Tucson, Arizona until you go into that contact record, edit it, and then save it. The system will automatically populate it then. But no, by default, the system will not populate that value if you only put in the zip code.
Excellent question.
Very
from our
good
friend,
question,
though.
yeah.
And then the other question that he did have here was, occasionally his data sources changes the field names. Is there a way that he can edit the template so he doesn't have to recreate it?
It's a good question. So yes, you can edit the template. However, the problem is that your spreadsheet that you're having the system look at still has to be in that same initial format. So in other words, you've got that spreadsheet that you want to import today that's got new column names. You wouldn't be able to use that spreadsheet. You'd have to create a brand new template. Or, no, that would be the only way. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to use that new spreadsheet. You'd have to go in and either take that new spreadsheet, save it in the original format, and then once you're in there, add the, nope, still can't do it. Gosh. Yeah, nope, sorry.
Yeah, good questions.
Good
though.
question.
These are really good questions.
Yeah, you stumped me again.
All right.
But no, you can't.
Last legitimate question that we've gotten. Someone is focusing on mapping the physical billing and shipping address, okay? Instead of adding the fields into the Excel, can you upload the field from address 1 to the fields while importing? In the past, this person just populated the physical, not realizing she needed to populate all three.
So I think you might have to rephrase the initial question.
So instead of adding the fields into the Excel, can you upload the field from address 1 to the fields while importing?
I got it. So what you can do is instead of having address 1 and... Yeah, see, the problem is the system's always going to look at your spreadsheet for these columns. And if they're not there, the address 2 and 3 during your import process can be mapped to none. That would be the way to resolve, I believe, what you're asking. So in other words, you don't have these 2 columns in your spreadsheet. You only have address 1. When the system goes in and asks you what address fields you want mapped, you would change address 2 and 3 to none on each of those, the physical, the billing, and the shipping. I think I might have answered your question. If not, feel free to email me that, and then we could always have a phone conversation to discuss it, because that might be completely off base of what you're asking, I think, maybe, possibly.
Well, good. I think we covered all the questions. I did answer a couple of them just on a one-on-one basis.
Okay.
So the next slide that we do have here that's going to be on our slide deck, it should be giving us some additional links. So if we pop that open, that should give us a way to see. We have some information inside of our CRM knowledge base around getting data done right, consumer basics around importing records. But also notice here we have a link to the product bulletin webinar on Canada's anti-spam legislation. So if I scared you, watch that.
Perfect.
And also, we have one on forms. While this isn't necessarily tied to your consumer forms that might be on your website and whatnot, a lot of the best practices on how you collect information through a form is also going to be really good practices when you're collecting it through some of the other importing processes.
Perfect.
So lots of links, and we recommend downloading the PowerPoint when you have it in the client portal, or as we said, it's in the handouts field of your GoToWebinar right now as well.
Perfect. And then Sam's favorite slide, aside from the questions.
Where we get to be done. Yay! So
no, actually, it's where you get to reach out to us.
Oh, I see. So, yes, as you can see, both our titles are here, both our email addresses are here. So, if you want to reach out to Robin and say, I really liked the color of your shirt, or if you have questions about imports, either or, you can absolutely reach out.
Or both.
Or both. Yeah, actually. Yes. Yeah. So, definitely put that out. And if you have any additional questions as well, feel free to send those to us, or of course your CRM analysts or your account managers are excellent people to ask any questions to as well.
Yep.
Because maybe it has to do with something that isn't really importing, it is tied to a larger topic or initiative or issue.
Yep.
So always, there's a lot of people at SimpleView that care about you, and a lot of people that want to make sure you're successful in your jobs.
Yep, absolutely.
Including us too.
Us too, especially. All right. Thank you for joining us today, guys. Have a great day.
Absolutely. And remember, stick around. We have 5 questions that we ask you in a post-event survey. So once we close out, you'll get them to pop up on your screen. Take the time to fill it out. With that said, now we can wave and say goodbye.
Bye.